today we have really two themes, which if you had a chance to see the agenda before this, you'll have seen. And if not, we're dropping a link into the agenda into the chat here. So you'll be able to see, follow along with the agenda as we go. But there's two main sections. Sorry, I just went too soon. Two sections. First, we're going to talk about measuring circularity in your supply chain, and then we're going to talk about a few frameworks. And as you all saw, I went the next slide a little too fast here. So your first poll, this is not a quiz, there's no right or wrong answer, is how familiar are you with supply chain, with zero waste, and with the circular economy? And again, there's no right or wrong answer. This is so that all the speakers today can have a good idea of what you're walking into today with in terms of experience and familiarity. So far, supply chain's leading, which is a good sign since it's a supply chain problem-solving workshop. Zero waste and circular economy are neck and neck, so that's also great to see. And I'll give this just a couple more minutes. If you're just joining us, this is an interactive workshop, so you'll need the internet in some fashion, either on your phone or in an internet browser. You'll go to menti.com, which you can see on the top of this screen, and you'll enter in the code that you see. That will bring up an ability for you to interact with us, and we'll be using this throughout the entire workshop. Just give this another 2 minutes. We keep seeing different locations coming in, so I think that's really great to see people from all around the world. I hope you are also going to bring some good solutions for us. Those of us in the US are on our second cups of coffee to get our brains turned up. But for many of you, you're at the end of your day. So hopefully your energy levels are already there and you can be ready to share some insights with those around you. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. But again, don't worry, you have a couple more slides till I start quizzing you. So the stakes aren't quite high yet, but it's good to see a strong familiarity with supply chain, but it's not fives. So that's good for our speakers to keep in mind. And again, zero waste and circular economy, the average is a neck and neck. But as you can see, the spread of the team is a little bit different. So we've got a little bit more familiarity, I'd say, with zero waste than circular economy. The next question then, these all have to do with circular economy. So for those of you who aren't that familiar with this, with circularity, this may be kind of a bummer for you. But if you are familiar with circularity, then you can say, how familiar are you with these concepts? You could explain it to somebody else, or you've never heard of it. Those are really the two spectrums that we've got here. So far, small familiarity, which is totally fine. I'm going to speak a little bit about this in just a couple of minutes in the context of supply chain. So this again helps me know that I need to explain these a little bit more in order to increase all of your familiarity. Rocio from Australia, nice to see you. It must be in the middle of the night to see you on the chat, but it's nice to see you anyway. All right, I'm going to give this 5 more seconds if you're just joining. The instructions are at the top of the screen. All right, we are going to move on. And now the stakes are high. So you've had a chance, hopefully, to find your way to menti.com, to enter the code at the top of the screen. These quiz questions count. So these are going to follow you the whole time today. And again, the winner gets a prize at the end. So here we go. Now, time to answer matters on your score. All right, here we go. hold on, everybody. The sound seems to be confusing everything. So hopefully, here we go. Hopefully we now have a actual question coming up. All right. So this question is, how much material enters the global economy each year? The correct answer is 100. Now, I have attempted to turn off the music. I think I was successful. And it was a really great song, but it just is a little bit too overwhelming here. And we have 2 other questions that I seem to have skipped past. So here we go. We're going to go to the previous question, which is question 2 out of 13. There's 13 questions today, which will load here, hopefully, or I need to go redo how the quiz works for better time for next time, which may just be the problem here. I'm going to give it one more chance. If this doesn't work, we'll switch over to my presentation and I will work on getting the snafu worked out for the next speaker, which is me. All right, how much power is today's workshop taking? Have a guess. This is going to be in kilowatts, 20 kilowatts, 30 kilowatts, or 40 kilowatts. So today, with all of us here on Zoom from around the world, how much power is this taking? Great. The correct answer is 40 kilowatts. That's about the same as a very efficient refrigerator for 1 month. It's about the same amount of energy that today's meeting is taking. The next question is, we already did that one. It's incredible how many times I've done this quiz and how few problems I've ever had. And now that all of you are here, we're having a few snafus. All right, question 2 may or may not load. We're going to give it one more chance. Which country produces the most waste in the world? You're going to have 3 options here: US, China, or India. Which country produces the most waste? All right, 3 seconds to answer. And how do people answer? Ooh, neck and neck. The right answer is China. US is second. All right, great. So, and we've done question 3, which takes us, and the correct answer for this is 100 billion tons. 100 billion tons of material enters the global economy each year. So this takes us now into a leaderboard. Hopefully this is somehow accurate. And we've got 2 very distinct leaders coming out. So again, keep your phones nearby. We're going to have hopefully a snafu-free quiz at the end of every presentation. So now we're going to switch into a couple of thoughts to keep us anchored throughout today. What is a good circular supply chain? I've got just a couple of slides to share with you on this. And then if you've got any questions, of course, we can address them. But keep these in mind as each of the presenters go through, and we can have some shared language to work through together today. So in supply chain, of course, we spend our time thinking all about value and waste. And we want to increase value and decrease waste, of course. And so we often use a value stream map. And when we think about value stream mapping, of course, we're going through to find value, but almost more often we end up using this tool in order to find waste streams. And they look like this, of course. Many of you have probably participated, used value stream mapping as a tool in your own operation, and we can find value and waste in materials that we use, in energy sources that we use, in time, and in some versions also with cost. And so as we go through each step of our operation, we start to define value and waste. On my day job, we're exploring a newer version, a connected live version that starts to flip the idea of waste and value to better support as we think about circularity, treating waste as value, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So we start to apply some technology to the concepts of a value stream map. If we start thinking about the concepts of circularity, I'll speak about each one of these quite briefly. We want to design waste out, we want to keep materials in play, and we want to restore or regenerate natural systems. And I'll go through each of these and explain just a little bit about the role of supply chain. So this first one is business models based on designing waste out. Some examples here would be, if you think about in your past using value stream mapping or using lean management, really getting rid of the waste out of any process. So we see businesses starting to pop up on sharing platforms, such as Uber. So instead of buying a car, you're buying transportation, product as a service, modular products. And when we think about the supply chain elements of this, I suppose all of us on the call who work in supply chain have had a challenge at some point that says, go find waste, go take waste out of your process. So we're quite trained on how to look at a process and remove the waste. The second principle of circular economy is really about businesses focused on keeping materials and resources in play or circulating through the global economy. And businesses models are popping up around this as well. So there's a whole world around maintenance. So I've got a picture of an airplane engine up here. And the idea of applying technology in order to predict how this engine will perform can keep it in play ideally forever. So we see secondary material strategies, organizations who are starting to explore take-back programs and remanufacturing. You'll hear a little bit about that today. New technologies are emerging for creating sensors and tracking programs. And resource recovery is happening to find ocean plastics, for example. And supply chains play a role in that, because if we think about all the material in the world, so every material that you see in front of you right now, wherever it is that you're sitting, this becomes feedstock for another operation somewhere in the world. Similarly, if you think about your supply chain role, every operation today becomes feedstock for an operation tomorrow. So this idea of connection means that we need to have a lot of visibility, and supply chain offers visibility. The third principle of circular economy is regenerating natural systems. And of course, if a business uses one of these principles as a business model, the circular economy says need to be had in this space. The idea here is we leave the environment better than when we found it. And examples here are biomaterials that are coming up, which add value back into the biosphere through, let's say, composting. We're seeing some really interesting circular fishing farming. There's renewable energy sources happening at scale. So, shifting to solar or wind, which allows us to undam rivers and so forth. And so when we think about the role of supply chain and we think about the different types of materials that are going to be entering our supply chains, they may be a bit more fragile than traditionally. So we have to start thinking about how we can really be the stewards of those materials. All right, so we think again about this idea of value in waste. Most of you will be familiar with this. It's called the butterfly diagram. Some of you may not have seen it given the rating on familiarity of circular economy. How this works is these are the circles of the circular economy. And so on the left, we see anything that goes back into the biosphere. This could be heat, this could be energy, this could be water, this could be wood, timber, etc. And on the right in blue, we see what's called technical materials, and those would not go back into the planet, maybe plastics, maybe metals. And the idea here is that you keep the loop as small as possible. So you want to have smaller circles, smaller loops, and let an item remain as itself for as long as possible. Notably, recycling is the loop of last resort. Sometimes people get recycling and circular economy mixed up, but in reality, recycling is sort of the last option that we want to do here. All right, so I'm going to ask you a question here pretty soon. Earlier, I had asked familiarity with a few terms, and familiarity was not very high. So we're going to do a crash course on this. I'm going to go through these terms extremely quickly, and then I'm going to ask you to put them in order. So here we go. First one, closing the loop. This is really, of course, about having a material come back into a value chain and be used again and again and again. Predict is when we look ahead and we say, out of the environment, where will waste be produced that I can use as feedstock in my operation? Capture is where we go out into the world and find feedstock. Today, this is happening often through ocean and ocean plastics. In tomorrow's world, I predict will be mining landfill, and ultimately you'll be capturing from another person's operation. Narrow is when we use less. So think about lean management, using less in your operation. Identify is when we say, hey, look, we found waste. Intensify is when an item is used longer. So we want, or more. So we drive up utilization so that items aren't sitting idle in the economy and not adding any value. And slow is when we extend the life of an item so that it can last forever. So we are going to go back into Menti. This is not a quiz. This is just a question. So put these 7 in order, hopefully on your phone. You can see the right order on here. My screen is a little bit confused and squished, but hopefully you're able to see it just fine on your screen. Perfect. It's a little squished, but hopefully you're able to see it and have a vote. And I'll just give this a couple of minutes. All right, perfect. So we have enough votes. And again, apologies for the squishy manner of the screen. But what this looks like when it's put in order is like this. This is my version, open for discussion, of course. But we'll go through a couple of these categories. And again, keep these in mind for presentations later today. So first, identify. And again, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. This is where we say, is there waste in our process? I like this definition of waste that, in a circular economy, everything adds value. It's just that it escapes out of where it's adding value. So it becomes fugitive and it's not where we want it to be. It could have value if it was in a different location. A good place to look is when you think about, let's say, supplier packaging. So if you think about what comes in and what goes out of every process in your supply chain, often there's waste that maybe would not be picked up in a traditional value stream map. And we can measure this. Our version is an in-out ratio. So if you weigh everything on the way in and on the way out of your operation, can you account for every last kilo, or is there some escaped value somewhere in your operation? The next one is intensify. This is about driving up utilization. This can be achieved in 3 ways. You can redesign your business model and move to product as a service. You can redesign your product and make it more modular so that each component can be swapped out and the product can be used more frequently by more people. Or you can redesign your process, and that's obviously where we often come in. We really eliminate waste, think differently about how the process is working. Maybe you do 3D printing, maybe you're shortening your supply chain. And we can measure this as well. Not surprising that utilization would be the measure. Going on to the next one, narrow. So again, this is about using less. This is, if you think about utilities used in your processes, for example, electric, water, air, for example, or the different consumables going through your process. So this is about applying lean thinking. And here we get to closer and closer to zero waste. I've called it waste reduction to keep the target at 100%, but it's the same concept of getting to zero waste. The next one is called predict, and I spoke about this a little bit. If our job is to look out over the entire world and figure out where the feedstock is to feed into a different process, we need to be smart about all those different materials and start to predict where they are and how we can use them. The measurement for this, you've seen I've put in air quotes, forecast accuracy. We know how to forecast, but this is a different type of item that we're forecasting. Forecasting waste is a little bit different than, let's say, forecasting supplies needed for a given operation. The next one is slow. Again, this is another picture of the airplane engine, and the idea that we can make an item last forever is really the idea. And so we measure this through version improvement. So if we think that your current version of your smartphone lasts 2 years, the next version we would hope to last 4 years, and so forth and so on until items are really lasting forever. Close is what we most often talk about with circularity. This is taking a material that no longer has value in its current form, in this case, fish skin, giving it new value, in this case, turning it into leather in a very sustainable manner, and making shoes. This is an example of a company called 7 Leagues in Vancouver, and a cool example of giving something a higher value. So this would be, you know, on the right side of the butterfly diagram on the regenerative side. Another example is how to improve on current materials, in this case using mushrooms, to make a styrofoam compete on cost and functionality. So just a couple of examples of using materials to give more value into the economy. Our version of measuring this is saying how much of your operation is sourced from a secondary material. And of course, the goal is 100%. Even knowing where your material comes from can be a real challenge. So even being able to measure this is a great place to start. And last one is about capturing. I call this secondary materials as a service. We have different companies and a whole different industry popping up around this. This target's a little bit different. So all the other measures, you start at 0 and work your way up to 100. In this case, we would start well over 100, and the idea is to come down to 100. So as we go out into the environment and start capturing feedstock today that we do through mining, how do we make sure we're not taking more than what's actually needed by the economy? Great, so as we think about all these different phases, it really comes down to 4 questions that were shared in the agenda. And we'll think more about this today. So how circular am I today in my supply chain, either in the product? Can I put measurements into the product so I know at each step in the value chain how circular it is, or the process supporting it? How do I use less? That's the lean management. How do my assets, machines, trucks, et cetera, last forever? And how do I exchange materials with others? All right, this was a quick crash course, but hopefully gave you a few elements to think about as we go through today. The last question I'll ask you for right now, and then I do have a couple more quiz questions, is which questions are you most focused on in your supply chain right now? Perfect, thank you, brave person, for answering the one. Good, we've got a couple more coming in. Oops, sorry about that. Pretty equal actually across them all, which is really cool. And a lot of presentations I give, the how circular am I today is usually at the high point, but then again, you're here for a zero waste supply chain workshop. So unsurprising that you are more familiar and further along than many audiences. All right, perfect. Rapid couple of quiz questions. I am a few minutes behind schedule, so I want to make sure to hand this over to the next speaker. Let's see if the quiz will work with us today. No, it did not work with us today. Great. All right, what material was used to make the shoes that I just talked about? Is it mushrooms, is it plastic, or is it fish? Fish. Excellent work. To those who answered fish, that is the right answer. The next question is, what is the purpose of slow? So we went through 7 different phases of circular supply chains. Is it to use less? Is it to make items last forever? Or is it to increase utilization? And most of you got that correct, which is great. It's to make items last forever. Great. Our leaderboard is developing. We will keep an eye on this throughout today. And it looks like Carrie, wherever you are in the world, you're doing phenomenally well. All right, so we are now going to switch over to Carrie George. Carrie, you should be able to unmute yourself. If not, Scott will help you do that. And we'll turn it over to you for 15 minutes.